It was a bitter cold afternoon in New York City, the kind where the wind seemed to slice right through your coat, your skin, and into your very soul. The street bustled with the usual rhythm, horns blaring, heels clicking, conversations overlapping in 100 languages. At the corner of 5th Avenue and 47th Street, a crowd moved past the steps of a chic new French-Asian fusion bistro, Le Miraculeux, known not only for its gourmet cuisine, but also for its air of exclusivity. Inside, suited men and elegant women sipped saffron-infused cocktails and laughed over $300 plates of Wagyu tartare. Outside, however, the world looked different. On a metal grate near the restaurant's back alley, a frail, dirt-smudged young woman named Clara knelt with her arms around her thin coat, rocking gently to stay warm. Her shoes had holes in the soles, and her fingers were stiff from the cold. Yet her eyes, startlingly green and wide, held a glimmer of something untouched by her suffering. When the back door of the restaurant opened and a tall man in a crisp navy trench coat stepped out holding a to-go box, Clara lifted her head. She didn't beg. She didn't plead. She simply looked up at him, and in the softest voice, as if ashamed of even asking, she whispered, "May I have your leftovers, sir?" The man, Julian Reeve, stood frozen. As the CEO of Reeve Tech Industries and one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the country, he was used to people wanting things from him. Investors wanted more return. Shareholders wanted more power. Friends wanted favors. Women wanted his name. But this was different. This wasn't a demand. It wasn't even a proper request. It was a prayer. He looked down at the girl, at her cracked lips, her too thin wrists, the bruises on her cheekbone that hadn't come from a fall. He was about to hand over the box wordlessly and walk away when something in her eyes caught him, like a memory clawing its way out from the depths of his past. For a brief moment, he saw his sister Emma in those eyes. Emma, who had died on the streets when she was just 17 after running away from their abusive father. Julian had buried that pain with money, accolades, and polished business suits, but Clara's voice had unearthed it. He knelt down, gently placed the box in her hands and asked, "What's your name?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Clara." Julian looked at her again, really looked, and for the first time in years, he didn't see a problem to solve or a street person to pass by. He saw a life, a story waiting to be heard. And in that moment, something shifted in him. Something that would change both of their lives forever. Julian wasn't sure what made him speak next. Perhaps it was the way Clara's hands trembled as she clutched the food box, or maybe it was that haunting resemblance to Emma, the same hollow cheeks, the same resilience hidden beneath layers of sorrow. "Come with me," he said, almost surprising himself. Clara's body stiffened. Her instincts screamed danger. She had lived too long on the streets to trust a stranger, no matter how expensive his coat looked. "I won't hurt you," Julian added gently. "Just come inside and get warm. There's a seat in the restaurant." Clara shook her head, backing up like a scared animal. "I don't belong in there," she murmured. "They'll throw me out." Julian hesitated, then reached into his coat and handed her his business card. "If you change your mind, I'll be inside for another hour." With that, he turned and walked back through the restaurant's rear entrance. For several minutes, Clara just stared at the card. The gold embossing felt surreal between her dirty fingers. Julian Reeve, CEO, Reeve Tech Industries. The name meant nothing to her. She had stopped watching the news years ago. What mattered was not the title, but the gentleness in his voice. Hunger, loneliness, and a cold too brutal to endure finally made the decision for her. She rose shakily, brushed off what she could of her tattered clothes, and walked, slowly, fearfully, toward the front of the restaurant. Inside Le Miraculeux, the maitre d' was already shaking his head before she even opened her mouth. "We have a dress code," he said with a dismissive glance. Clara started to turn around, humiliated, but Julian stood from his table and strode forward. "She's with me," he said firmly, wrapping a warm hand around her shoulder. The maitre d' opened his mouth to protest, but one look at Julian's face shut him up. The room hushed as eyes turned toward the strange pair, her in rags, him in cashmere. Julian didn't care. He led her to the booth by the window and signaled for the waiter. "Whatever she wants," he said. Clara looked around, dizzy with disbelief. She sank into the plush leather seat as if it might swallow her whole. "Why are you doing this?" she asked after a long silence. Julian didn't answer right away. He poured her a glass of water and set it gently in front of her. "You reminded me of someone I loved," he said, "and I couldn't walk away again." For the next hour, Clara ate like someone who had forgotten what full felt like. She devoured the seared salmon, mashed truffle potatoes, and warm bread with trembling hands, pausing only to breathe and occasionally steal glances at Julian. He didn't pry, didn't demand explanations. He simply let her eat, allowed the silence to be soft instead of oppressive. After her last bite, she leaned back in the booth and closed her eyes. For a second, she looked peaceful. "I haven't had a meal like that in, I don't know, maybe ever," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Julian smiled, but there was sadness behind it. "You don't have to go back to the streets tonight," he said gently. "I can get you a hotel, safe place, warm bed." Clara's expression changed, skepticism, fear, pride, all flickering across her face. "Why?" she asked again. "Because you remind me of my sister," he replied, his voice thickening. "And I failed her. I can't fail again." Clara looked down, her fingers knotting in her lap. "I'm not your sister," she said quietly. "I've made mistakes, done things I'm not proud of." Julian leaned forward, his tone unwavering. "So have I." A long silence passed between them, two broken souls meeting not in pity, but in mutual recognition. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, one night." He smiled. "One night." That night, Julian drove Clara to a boutique hotel near Central Park, paid for a week's stay, and handed her a small envelope. Inside was $200 in cash and the name of a local women's shelter he supported. "Only if you want it," he said. Clara stood in the hallway staring at him, unsure of what to say. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked one last time. Julian paused, then said softly, "Because someone should have done it for my sister, and maybe it's not too late to do it for you." He turned and walked away, leaving Clara with a heart full of questions, and for the first time in years, a flicker of hope. The hotel room smelled like clean linens and lavender, a stark contrast to the garbage and diesel Clara had inhaled nightly for years. She stood in the doorway for a long time, afraid to touch anything, as if her presence would stain the soft cream bedspread or crack the glass fixtures. Finally, she sat on the edge of the bed, removed her battered shoes, and stared at her feet. Her socks were soaked through, her toes purple from cold. As she peeled them off, she began to cry, silently. At first, then in gasping sobs, the kind of crying that doesn't come from a single wound but from the accumulation of 100 silent hurts. The bed creaked as she curled into it, pulling the blanket tightly around her thin frame. That night, for the first time in over 2 years, Clara slept indoors, and not just indoors, but safe, warm, with a full stomach. She dreamed of her childhood, of peanut butter sandwiches and Christmas lights. When she awoke, the sunlight was streaming through the sheer curtains, and for a second she forgot where she was. Then she remembered the restaurant, the man in the navy coat, the miracle. Julian, meanwhile, sat at his penthouse window with a glass of scotch untouched on the table beside him. His world, so precisely ordered, felt shaken. He had done more than feed a hungry girl. He had opened a door he'd spent years nailing shut. Memories of Emma haunted him now. Her laughter, the way she'd braid his hair when their father passed, out drunk, how she used to dream of becoming a ballet dancer. He had failed her. She had asked for help once, just once, and he had told her he was too busy. She had died 4 months later, found frozen behind a bus station. Julian had never forgiven himself. He had thrown himself into his company, building empires as penance, trying to buy a version of peace. But seeing Clara, her face so like Emma's, had cracked something open, and now, instead of avoiding the pain, He let himself feel it. That morning, he called his executive assistant and cleared his schedule. Then he called the women's shelter, requesting a private visit. It was time to do something real, not for PR, not for legacy, but for redemption. Clara stayed at the hotel for 3 days. She wanted to leave the first night, convinced it was all a trap, that the kindness had strings she couldn't see yet. But the front desk staff treated her with surprising dignity, and no one asked for anything. Each morning she found a note slipped under her door from Julian. Short messages written in careful handwriting. Hope you slept well. Don't give up. The world hasn't given up on you. Call me if you need anything. She didn't call, not yet. But she kept the notes. On the 4th day, she checked out of the hotel, not because she was ungrateful, but because something inside her had changed. She didn't want to survive anymore. She wanted to live. With the shelter address in hand and the envelope of money still untouched, she walked 10 blocks to the center. The intake counselor was kind, didn't flinch when Clara confessed to drug use, to the men she'd been with for food or shelter. Instead, she nodded and said, "You're safe now." Clara cried again, less violently this time, more like the slow thaw of a frozen heart. That evening, Julian received a text, unknown number, just 4 words, "I'm at the shelter." He stared at it for a long time, then typed back, "I'm proud of you." Over the next few weeks, Clara attended every group session the shelter offered. She enrolled in a GED program, signed up for trauma therapy, and helped younger women who arrived more broken than even she had been. Julian visited the shelter weekly, not as a CEO or a benefactor, but as a volunteer. He spoke to the women, with sincerity, shared his story about Emma, and began funding a special scholarship for homeless women entering college. He and Clara formed an odd but unshakable friendship. They talked often, not always about their pain, but about books, dreams, and the little absurdities of life. For the first time, Julian laughed without guilt, and Clara began to dream, really dream, of a future that didn't end in an alley,